All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Molly Crabapple. Molly is a New York City-based writer and artist who has drawn and reported for Marvel, DC, the New York Times, South by Southwest, Vice, The Guardian, and numerous other venues, all of which and more you can find at mollycrabapple.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at Molly Crabapple. Molly, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so Molly, you've actually been down to the camp at Guantanamo Bay several times, and your reporting for this is amazing, and I highly suggest everyone, when you're writing on this is great, but we're going to link to this, but obviously you're a visual artist, and your art on this and sketches that you draw from down there are phenomenal, so people definitely need to check them out. But let's start out by discussing just how the press is treated down at Guantanamo Bay.
So reporting from Guantanamo Bay is an extremely bizarre and challenging experience. On one hand, every single press officer is an incredibly nice, warm, charming person, sometimes to a slightly creepy extent because they research all your past work and tell you how much they love it. But on the other hand, what you're allowed to see is so limited. When you're touring the Guantanamo prisons, it's almost like looking at a dollhouse without the dolls, because the detainees are completely absent. Instead, you're just paraded through show cells. You go to the hospital where they have the force-feeding chair that's empty. You go to the detainees' kitchens, and they make special food for you so you can taste what the detainees' food supposedly tastes like. Everything is this utterly choreographed tour.
And it's all done in this very PR-friendly way. But when because what's funny, because you were just there again for a second time. You actually went on the prison tour itself, and I guess like people have seen your previous work on this. How do they treat you, knowing that you've written things that are critical to? Rightly critical of the way it is down there.
The Department of Defense was a bit upset with me. One of the spokesmen actually called up my editor at Vice and complained that I had made him look like, quote unquote, a tool. But when I went back the second time, they were very nice around me, but very wary. My escort even told me that they had to be careful what they said around me.
Wow. Well, talk a little bit about, because regular reporters are restricted in many ways. Photographers are restricted in many ways. Describe how kind of the restrictions you actually have as a visual artist, and what because those are actually kind of special restrictions, even more so than what a photographer or regular, just a print journalist would have.
Visual art is the only representation allowed in the war court at Guantanamo. So it's basically the only visuals you'll ever get about are from me and a few other artists who've gone down there. And at the end of every single day, we actually had to have an official court censor stamp all of our drawings.
Mm-hmm.
We had all sorts of things we weren't allowed to do, most notably the faces of the guards. When I was drawing the prisons, they also had a similar censorship. They call it OPSEC, where I wasn't allowed to draw guards' faces. I wasn't allowed to draw detainees' faces. I wasn't allowed to draw like more than 2 buildings in one shot, or any sort of thing that gives a hint of the camp's layout. In some ways, it's actually easier as a visual artist than a photographer, because with photographers, they just delete all of their photos at the end of the day that don't meet the OPSEC requirements. Whereas as an artist, I'm actually able to kind of like draw the censorship. I'm able to draw like big black blobs with faces, or draw in censored bars for where a forbidden building might be.
Yeah, the whole, honestly, the whole, your depiction of the guards is creepy as hell, but also the whole situation is creepy as hell, and it's really, really effective, because for most of the guards that you draw, at least in the I think it was your big piece, it don't get Gitmo better than this. All the guards have these sort of like, not happy faces, but sort of expressionless circle faces with just dots and a line for a mouth. And then, that kind of does really, it's a really great, representation of the situation down there, where just sort of like blank, faceless, repression that these prisoners and the press that go down there to cover it actually are under.
It's very strange when you do these official interviews with the guards that are set up for you. The guards won't admit to having any opinions about anything. They won't admit to knowing what indefinite detention means. They just say, I'm here to carry out my mission. Any sort of larger thought is outside of my lane. And it's to the point where I actually recommended that press officers, when they're prepping these guards, give them some pre-written anecdotes with concrete detail so they don't all sound like North Koreans. But yeah, it's just this very mechanistic, expressionless experience interviewing those guys.
Yeah. Describe a little bit, because one of the things you actually write that's really, really interesting is the fact that the guards are cycled out so much, the staff, the contractors, everything around it is been cycled through, because so like the guards that are there today were not there I would still consider what's going on there torture, but the more obvious torture that went on before, none of the people who were there during the Bush era with a different type of torture are actually there anymore. Even the contractors have been cycled out. Describe how that actually, and the only people who actually were there to experience that are the prisoners who are still there. Talk about that a bit.
The prisoners and a very interesting figure called Zach. Zach is the official Muslim cultural advisor of Guantanamo, and he's been there for about 8 years. Supposedly his job is to teach the guards to be culturally sensitive and to teach the prisoners to be culturally sensitive to the guards. But he's actually this strangely sinister figure who just laughs at the idea that detainees were ever beaten and won't allow his face to be shown. But you're right. As for the guards, most of these guards were kids when 9/11 happened. They're only in their early 20s now, and they've never. I don't do a lot of reading about the history of Guantanamo. They certainly don't read any of the WikiLeaks documents about the charges against the prisoners, and yeah, they just don't know the history of the place.
Right. Describe a bit your experience of actually getting to go, because we've covered on the show about the hunger strikes that have been going on in Guantanamo, and they're still going on today, less and less so because people are being force fed and tortured. But describe the room and talking to like the doctor who actually would be administrating this. What was your experience actually seeing the room where these prisoners are force fed?
As part of the prison tour, we see the hospital, and it's a very strange thing because it's a nice hospital. It's not a bad hospital. And so they're pointing out the radiology lab, the surgical suite, and then they bring us to the point of our interest, which is their special force feeding chair. It's basically this chair with restraints strapped to it. And the guards will not use the term force feeding. There has to be a policy at Guantanamo where they're banned from saying that. They will deny, until they ask you to leave, that chaining a man down and shoving a tube up his nose into his stomach is force feeding. At best, they'll call it involuntary enteral feeding. And they actually get visibly upset when you use the term force feeding.